The volcanic plains of Pyros Prime burned under 3 red suns. Heat waves rose from black stone that had cooled 10,000 years ago, but still remembered the fire. In the center of the largest crater, the dragon clans gathered for the hatching ceremony. Vermithrax stood over her clutch of eggs, her crimson scales reflecting the light like polished rubies. She was a warrior of the Fire Clan, daughter of ancient bloodlines, and today, her offspring would join the world. Around her, other dragons waited. Their massive forms cast long shadows across the nesting grounds. The first egg cracked. A strong hatchling burst through the shell, already breathing small jets of flame. The gathered dragons rumbled their approval. This one would be a fighter. The second egg opened more slowly. The hatchling inside was careful and methodical, breaking the shell piece by piece. When she emerged, her golden scales gleamed bright and perfect. The dragons nodded. This one would be wise. 3 more eggs hatched in succession. Each hatchling showed the proper signs: strong bodies, bright scales, and the sacred fire burning in their throats. Vermithrax felt pride swell in her chest. Her clutch was worthy of the bloodline. Then came the last egg. It was smaller than the others, and its shell looked thin and fragile. When it finally cracked, the sound was wrong. Not the sharp break of strength, but the weak crumble of something failing. The hatchling that crawled out was tiny. Her scales were pale, almost translucent, showing the delicate skin beneath. Her wings were folded wrong against her body, the membranes too thin. She opened her mouth and tried to breathe fire like her siblings, but nothing came out except a small cough. The celebration died. Dragons from all the clans moved closer to look at the weak hatchling. She shivered in the hot air, her small body unable to regulate its temperature properly. Her eyes were large and frightened as massive faces loomed over her. Scorithax, the clan leader, bent down to examine the defective offspring. His scales were black as obsidian and scarred from 100 battles. He had led the Fire Clan for 3 centuries and had never seen such weakness survive the hatching. "This one is damaged," he said. His voice was deep and final, like a judge pronouncing sentence. Vermithrax felt shame burn hotter than any fire. In dragon culture, weakness was not just unfortunate, it was disgraceful. It meant the bloodline carried flaws that could spread to future generations. She looked at the pale hatchling and felt no connection, no maternal instinct, only disappointment. "What should be done?" asked Drakthor, the clan's war commander. He was younger than Scorithax, but already famous for his victories against the Krill raiders. The elders conferred. Their discussion was not about mercy or compassion. Dragons did not have words for such concepts in their language. They spoke of tradition, of honor, and of maintaining the strength of their race. The weak hatchling tried to crawl toward her mother, seeking warmth and protection. Vermithrax stepped back. The rejection was instinctive and complete. The other hatchlings, already stronger and more aware, also moved away from their defective sibling. Even at hours old, they understood the hierarchy. In the old times, such weakness would not have survived the first night, Scorithax said. But we are civilized now. We follow the law of the Galactic Council, then we abandon it, Vermithrax said. Her voice was cold and held no emotion. Place it on a world where it can face its fate. If it survives, it may one day return. If it dies, it was never meant to live. The dragons agreed. This was the compromise between their ancient ways and the modern galaxy's restrictions. They could not kill their own young outright, but they could leave them in situations where nature would make the choice. A containment pod was brought from the dragon ships that orbited above. The technology looked strange next to the primitive nesting grounds, a reminder that dragons walked between 2 worlds. They had fire and claws, but they also had starships and weapons that could crack planets. The weak hatchling was placed inside the pod. She cried out as the door sealed, a small sound that none of the dragons acknowledged. To show pity would be to show weakness themselves. "Where shall we send it?" Drakthor asked. Scorithax considered. "There is a new colony on the frontier. Humans have settled there recently. They are soft creatures who value strange things. Perhaps they will take pity on it, or perhaps the wilderness will claim it quickly. Either way, Our honor is satisfied. The dragons knew about humans. The hairless mammals had only joined the galactic community a century ago. But they were spreading fast. They were weak individually. With no natural weapons or armor, they could not breathe fire or survive in vacuum. Yet they built things and worked together in ways that sometimes surprised older races. Most importantly, humans had peculiar attitudes about helping the weak. Dragons viewed this as a flaw in human psychology, an evolutionary dead end that would eventually doom their species. But for now, it made them a suitable place to dispose of unwanted offspring. The pod was loaded onto a small shuttle. Coordinates were entered for the human colony world designated as Millbrook Station. The planet was unremarkable, mainly agricultural, far from any strategic importance, perfect for this purpose. As the shuttle lifted off, carrying the weak hatchling away, Vermithrax watched without expression. She had already dismissed the defective offspring from her thoughts. Her other 5 hatchlings were strong and worthy. They would carry on the bloodline with honor. The celebration resumed. The clan welcomed the 5 strong hatchlings with fire and ritual. Their names were chosen from the ancient language, each syllable a promise of future glory. They would train to become warriors, scholars, or leaders. They would make their clan proud. High above, the shuttle broke orbit and jumped to faster-than-light travel. Inside the pod, the weak hatchling cried in the darkness, alone and unwanted. She did not understand what was happening. She only knew that she was cold, hungry, and terrified. The journey took 3 days. The pod's life support was minimal, designed only to keep the hatchling alive until planetfall. There was no comfort, no stimulation, nothing but the dark container and the sound of the engines. When the shuttle reached Millbrook, it did not land. That would have required contact with the human authorities and explanations the dragons did not want to give. Instead, it simply released the pod from high orbit and departed. The pod fell through the atmosphere like a meteor. Its heat shield glowed red as friction built up. Inside, the hatchling was thrown against the padded walls, her weak body bruised by the turbulence. She was too young and too frightened to understand that she was being delivered to her fate. The pod's basic guidance system aimed for an unpopulated area outside the main human settlement. Parachutes deployed at the last moment, slowing but not stopping the descent. It hit the ground in a field of tall grain, crushing a circle of crops and throwing up a cloud of dirt. For a moment, everything was still. Then the pod's seal broke with a hiss of escaping air. The door fell open. The weak hatchling crawled out into an alien world. The sky was blue instead of red. The air was cool and moist instead of hot and dry. Strange smells filled her nostrils. Nothing like the volcanic stone of her birth. She was hurt from the crash. One wing hung at a wrong angle. Blood, pale pink instead of the proper crimson, leaked from cuts on her soft scales. She tried to move but collapsed after a few steps. In the distance, she heard a sound. Footsteps. Something was approaching through the grain. The hatchling tried to hide, tried to make herself smaller, tried to disappear, but she was too weak even for that. A shadow fell over her. The hatchling looked up with frightened eyes, expecting death or pain or more rejection. Instead, she saw a human face looking down at her with an expression she had never seen before. The old woman's eyes were wide with surprise. But there was something else there too. Something warm. "Oh, you poor thing," Margaret Cole said, kneeling down beside the injured creature. "What happened to you?" Margaret Cole had been checking her fence line when she heard the crash. Living alone on the farm for 5 years since her husband died, she had learned to investigate strange sounds. Coyotes sometimes got into the chicken coop. Machinery broke down. But this sound was different. Like thunder, but more focused. She found the pod in her east field, still smoking from the atmospheric entry. The strange metal container looked like something from the science fiction shows her grandchildren watched. But the small creature crawling out of it was very real. Margaret had no idea what species it was. She had seen pictures of various aliens on the news feeds. But this one did not match anything in her memory. It looked like the dragons from old Earth legends, but tiny and fragile. Its scales caught the light as it tried to move, then collapsed. The creature was hurt and scared. That was all Margaret needed to know. She hurried back to the farmhouse and grabbed her old truck. Loading the injured creature into a blanket, she drove as carefully as possible back home. The animal was so light, barely heavier than one of her cats had been. It trembled constantly, and its breathing sounded wrong. Inside her kitchen, Margaret cleared the table and laid out the blanket. She had raised children and grandchildren, tended injured animals, and nursed her husband through his final illness. The skills were the same regardless of species. First, she cleaned the wounds with warm water and antiseptic. The creature flinched but did not fight. Its eyes followed Margaret's movements, intelligent and aware. When Margaret spoke softly, trying to soothe it, the creature's trembling decreased slightly. The broken wing was the biggest problem. Margaret had set broken bones before, for chickens and once for a dog. She worked carefully, feeling along the delicate structure, until she found the break. The creature made a small sound of pain but held still as if it understood she was trying to help. She splinted the wing with popsicle sticks and medical tape, then wrapped it gently. The creature watched the entire process with those large, dark eyes. "There," Margaret said when she finished. "That should help it heal. Now, let's see about getting some food into you." She tried various things: meat, vegetables, milk, bread. The creature sniffed each offering but seemed uncertain. Finally, Margaret warmed some milk and mixed it with a little honey. The creature lapped at it hesitantly, then more eagerly. Within minutes, the bowl was empty. For the first time since emerging from the pod, the creature seemed to relax. Its shivering stopped. It curled up on the blanket and fell into an exhausted sleep. Margaret watched it for a long moment. Then she pulled out her communication tablet and contacted the colonial authorities. Whatever this creature was, someone probably needed to know about it. The response came faster than she expected. Within 2 hours, a vehicle arrived carrying Dr. Helen Price from the Xenobiology Research Station. The scientist was young, probably in her early 30s, with an eager expression that reminded Margaret of her own daughter. Helen examined the creature with professional instruments, scanning and analyzing. Her expression grew more serious with each reading. "Mrs. Cole, do you know what you have here?" Helen asked. "Some kind of alien, obviously," Margaret replied. "This is a dragon hatchling. From Pyros Prime. If my scans are correct, they're one of the oldest spacefaring races in the galaxy. Very powerful, very territorial, and very proud." Margaret looked at the small creature sleeping on her kitchen table. "This little thing? They grow much larger. An adult dragon can be the size of your barn. They breathe fire hot enough to melt steel. Their ships are among the most advanced in known space. Then why is this one so small and hurt?" Helen's expression became troubled. "That's what concerns me. Dragons are extremely protective of their young under normal circumstances. For one to be abandoned like this, in a crash pod, injured and alone, something is very wrong." She ran more scans, then pulled up data on her tablet. "Look at these readings. This hatchling is underweight. Its scale development is incomplete. The fire gland in its throat is non-functional. By dragon standards, this one would be considered defective." "Defective," Margaret repeated. The word tasted bitter. Dragons have very strict standards for their offspring. If a hatchling doesn't meet those standards, sometimes they practice what they call traditional abandonment. They leave the weak ones on remote worlds to survive or die on their own. Margaret felt anger rise in her chest. They threw away a baby because it wasn't perfect? It's their culture, Mrs. Cole. We can't judge alien species by human standards. "I can judge cruelty when I see it," Margaret said firmly. "This is a child, hurt and scared and left to die. I don't care what species did it." Helen sighed. "I understand your feelings, but we have to think about the political situation. If this hatchling belongs to a dragon clan, they might demand its return. Dragons are powerful, and we're just a small agricultural colony. We can't afford to make enemies." "They abandoned it," Margaret said. "That makes it a refugee, not property." "The galactic courts might not see it that way." Margaret looked at the sleeping hatchling. In the warmth of her kitchen, with food in its belly and its wounds tended, the creature looked peaceful. Small and vulnerable, but peaceful. "I'm keeping her," Margaret said. "Her?" "Yes, her. She needs a name, too. I'll call her Ruby, because of those little red spots in her scales." Helen started to protest, then stopped. She had been in the colony long enough to know that frontier farmers were stubborn people. Margaret Cole had a reputation for being particularly determined when she made up her mind. "At least let me file a report and register her with the xenobiology database," Helen said. "If the dragons do come looking, we'll need documentation of her condition when you found her." "Fine, but she stays here." Over the next few weeks, Ruby grew stronger under Margaret's care. The wing healed, though it never quite straightened properly. Ruby learned to move around the farmhouse, following Margaret from room to room. She was curious about everything, investigating objects with her snout and small claws. Margaret discovered that Ruby was remarkably intelligent. When Margaret spoke to her, Ruby listened intently. She learned to respond to her name within days. She understood simple commands like "come" and "stay" and "gentle" when she got too rough playing. Ruby also showed clear emotions. She was happy when Margaret came home from town. She was sad when left alone. She was frightened by loud noises but brave when facing new experiences, if Margaret was nearby. In every way that mattered, she was a thinking, feeling person trapped in a non-human body. The news of the dragon hatchling spread through the colony. Some people were curious and came to visit. Others were worried. Remembering stories about how dangerous dragons could be, Margaret welcomed the curious ones and ignored the worried ones. Governor Kenneth Bradford contacted Margaret directly. He was a politician, careful with his words and concerned about his colony's safety. "Mrs. Cole, I need you to understand the situation," he said during his visit. "The dragons have contacted us. They know their hatchling survived, and they want her back." "She has a name," Margaret said. "Ruby, and they don't want her back. They threw her away. They claim she is their property under dragon law. They say humans have no right to interfere with their cultural practices. And I say any culture that throws away children is wrong." Bradford rubbed his temples. "I sympathize with your position. I really do. But we're talking about a race that has destroyed colonies for lesser insults. They have warships in this sector. We have farming equipment and hope." Ruby, who had been sleeping in her corner, woke up and trotted over to Margaret. She climbed into the old woman's lap, something she had started doing when she wanted comfort. Margaret stroked the hatchling's scales gently. "Governor, I've lived 73 years on various worlds. I've seen wars and peace, prosperity and hardship. I've buried a husband and said goodbye to children who moved to distant stars. I know what matters and what doesn't." She looked down at Ruby, who was watching the governor with curious eyes. "This matters," Margaret said. "Standing up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. Protecting someone who needs protection. Being kind when others are cruel. These are the things that make us human. These are the things worth fighting for. Even if it costs lives, every good thing in history cost someone something. The question is whether we have the courage to pay the price." Bradford left without a clear answer. But 3 days later, the official message came. The dragon clans were sending a delegation to Millbrook. They were coming to reclaim their property and restore their honor. Margaret read the message while Ruby played with a ball of yarn on the floor. The hatchling had no idea that her birth species was coming back for her. She was content in her simple world of warmth, food, and love. "Well, Ruby," Margaret said quietly, "it looks like we're going to have visitors. And they're not going to be happy when I tell them no." Ruby looked up at the sound of her name and chirped happily. She brought the yarn ball to Margaret, wanting to play. Margaret picked up the ball and threw it across the room. Ruby chased after it with clumsy enthusiasm, her healing wing flapping awkwardly. She was getting stronger every day, but she would never be what the dragons considered normal. And that, Margaret thought, was just fine. Normal was overrated anyway. The dragon ships arrived on a Tuesday morning. 3 warships descended through the clouds, their hulls gleaming black and red in the sunlight. They were enormous, each one larger than the Colonial Administration building. They did not land, but hovered above Millbrook, casting shadows across the town. The Colonial Defense Force, such as it was, went on alert. 2 patrol boats and a handful of security officers were no match for dragon military power. Everyone knew it. The dragons knew it too, which was why they made no effort to hide their strength. Governor Bradford received word that the delegation would arrive at noon. They requested a meeting place outside of town, away from the main population. The governor agreed and designated a field near the spaceport. Then he contacted Margaret. "They want you there," he said, "with the hatchling. Her name is Ruby." Margaret reminded him for the 10th time. "Mrs. Cole, please, this is serious. These are not patient beings. If you refuse to comply, they could destroy this colony. Thousands of people live here. Families. Children." Margaret looked out her window at Ruby, who was napping in a patch of sunlight on the porch. The hatchling had grown noticeably in the past month. She was now the size of a large dog, though still far smaller than a proper dragon hatchling should be. Her scales had gained a bit more color, and she could now produce small sparks when she tried to breathe fire, though nothing like the flames her siblings could create. "I'll be there," Margaret said. "But I'm not giving her up. Please just listen to what they have to say." At noon, Margaret drove her old truck to the designated field. Ruby sat in the passenger seat, her head out the window, enjoying the wind. She had no idea what was about to happen. To her, this was just another ride, another adventure with the human who had become her whole world. A crowd had gathered despite orders to stay away. News drones hovered at a safe distance. The whole colony wanted to see how this would end. The dragon delegation descended on pillars of fire, landing with enough force to shake the ground. There were 5 of them, each one massive and terrible in their power. Their scales were deep red and black, polished to a mirror shine. Their eyes glowed with inner fire. When they moved, muscles rippled under armored skin that could turn aside bullets. The largest dragon stepped forward. This was Commander Drakthor, and he looked every bit the warrior. Scars crossed his face and neck, trophies from battles against enemies that most humans could not even imagine. When he spoke, his voice was like an avalanche. "I am Drakthor of the Fire Clan, commander of the 3rd Fleet, defender of Pyros Prime. I have come for what belongs to us." Governor Bradford stepped forward, trying to maintain diplomatic protocol. "Welcome, Commander. We are honored by your presence. Perhaps we can discuss this situation and find a solution that satisfies everyone." "There is nothing to discuss. The defective hatchling will be returned. Your interference in dragon affairs will cease. This is not a negotiation." Margaret climbed out of her truck. She helped Ruby down, and the small dragon stayed close to her legs, sensing the tension in the air. When Ruby saw the massive dragons, she froze. Her eyes went wide with recognition and fear. One of the other dragons moved forward. This was Vermithrax, and though Margaret did not know it, this was Ruby's birth mother. The large dragon looked down at the small hatchling with an expression that might have been contempt or might have been nothing at all. Ruby made a small sound, something between a whimper and a chirp. She pressed closer to Margaret, actually hiding behind the old woman's legs. "This is the defective one," Vermithrax said. "Still weak, still unable to produce proper flame. The decision to abandon it was correct." "She's not an it," Margaret said loudly. "She's a person with a name. Ruby. And she's not defective. She's just different." The dragons turned their attention to Margaret. 5 pairs of glowing eyes focused on one small human woman. The heat, radiating from their bodies, made the air shimmer. Any normal person would have been terrified. Margaret stood her ground. "You are the human who has interfered," Drakthor said. "You will surrender the hatchling now." "No." The simple word hung in the air. Several humans in the crowd gasped. Governor Bradford looked like he might faint. The dragons themselves seemed momentarily stunned that this tiny creature would refuse them. "You do not understand your situation," Drakthor said. His voice was dangerously quiet now. "We are offering you one chance to comply peacefully. If you refuse, we will take what is ours by force. Your settlement will burn. Your people will scatter. All of this because you claim attachment to a creature that is not even of your species." "I understand perfectly," Margaret said. "You threw away a baby because she didn't meet your standards. You left her to die alone and scared. That's not strength. That's cruelty. And I won't be part of it. How dare you judge us?" Vermithrax said. "Your species has been in space for barely a century. We have built empires that lasted longer than your entire civilization. We know the cost of weakness. We know what it takes to survive in a hostile galaxy. Then you should know that real strength isn't about being the biggest or the meanest," Margaret replied. "It's about protecting those who need protection. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." Dr. Helen Price had been standing with the governor. Now she stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. "Commander Drakthor, if I may," she said. "I've been studying Ruby, the hatchling, since Mrs. Cole found her. My research shows something interesting. While she cannot breathe fire like normal dragons, her neural development is actually more advanced. Her cognitive abilities, her emotional intelligence, her capacity for learning, these are all beyond normal dragon hatchling parameters." "Irrelevant," Drakthor said. "Strength is measured in fire and claw, not in thoughts and feelings. The defective one will never be a warrior. She will never bring glory to the clan. She is worthless. She is worthless." During this exchange, Ruby had been watching the large dragons. Despite her fear, something seemed to stir in her. When Drakthor called her worthless, when he dismissed everything she was, the small dragon did something unexpected. She stepped out from behind Margaret's legs. Her small body was trembling, but she placed herself between the old woman and the massive war commander. She could not breathe real fire, could not fight, could not win, but she would not let them threaten her grandmother without at least trying to protect her. The gesture was absurd. Ruby was barely knee-high to Drakthor. One casual swipe of his claw could end her, but she stood there anyway. Her wings spread as wide as they could go, making herself as large as possible in an instinctive threat display. For the first time, uncertainty crossed Drakthor's face. In dragon culture, warriors respected courage above all else. But this was not warrior courage. This was the courage of the absolutely powerless choosing to fight anyway. It was alien to him. "Foolish," he finally said. "Bravery without strength is just another form of weakness." But Vermithrax was staring at her rejected offspring with a strange expression. Something was working behind her eyes. Some thought that had never formed before. Governor Bradford tried again to find a diplomatic solution. "Perhaps we could arrange a compromise. Shared custody, or regular visits, or some form of cultural exchange program." "Dragons do not compromise," Drakthor said. "We have made our position clear. The human will surrender the defective hatchling, or we will take it. You have 3 days to comply." "And if we refuse?" Margaret asked. "Then we will demonstrate why ancient races are ancient, because they know how to deal with obstacles. Your colony is very flammable, human. Your buildings, your crops, your ships, all of it will burn until you understand that defying dragons has consequences." The threat was clear and credible. Dragons had destroyed colonies before for lesser insults to their honor. This was not the first time their cultural practices had brought them into conflict with other species. Dr. Price pulled up data on her tablet. "Commander, I feel obligated to point out that attacking a human colony would violate multiple galactic treaties. The Concord of Peaceful Species, the Protection of Civilian Populations Act, the General Prohibition on Genocide. We would not kill all of you," Drakthor said as if this was a generous concession. "Only enough to make our point clear. The Galactic Council will see this as a cultural dispute, not an act of war. They will issue strong statements and do nothing else, as they always do. He was probably right, Margaret thought. The galaxy was full of different species with different values. Not all of them agreed on basic things like the worth of individual life or the protection of children. Humans thought their values were universal. But that was just human arrogance. Still, being right or wrong about politics did not change what was right or wrong about Ruby. 3 days, Drakthor repeated. After that, we return with fire and justice. Choose wisely, humans. Choose survival over sentiment. The dragons launched themselves into the air, their wings creating wind that knocked several people off their feet. They flew back to their ships, leaving scorch marks on the ground where they had stood. The crowd erupted into worried conversation. Governor Bradford immediately started making calls, trying to reach someone in the Galactic Council who might help. Dr. Price began documenting everything for the historical record. Margaret just knelt down and hugged Ruby, who was shaking from the encounter. The small dragon burrowed into the embrace, seeking the comfort and safety she had never known before Margaret found her. "It's okay, sweetheart," Margaret whispered. "We'll figure this out. I won't let them take you." But as she held the small dragon and watched the warships hovering in the sky above her home, Margaret wondered if she had just sentenced an entire colony to death because she could not bear to give up one child who was not even human. 3 days to decide between compassion and survival. 3 days to choose between one life and thousands. For Margaret, it was not really a choice at all. The first person to arrive was a veteran named Carl Peterson. He had fought in the border wars against the Krill pirates 20 years ago and walked with a limp from an injury that never quite healed. He pulled up to Margaret's farm in an old hauler truck the morning after the dragon ultimatum. "Mrs. Cole," he said, climbing out with some difficulty. "I heard what's happening. Thought you might need someone to stand with you, Carl." "This isn't your fight," Margaret said. She was sitting on her porch, Ruby sleeping beside her chair. The hatchling had barely left Margaret's side since the confrontation. "Isn't it?" Carl settled into the other porch chair with a grunt. "Seems to me this is exactly my fight. I didn't spend 3 years getting shot at by pirates, so we could turn into the kind of people who throw children to monsters because we're scared. The dragons aren't monsters. They're just different. Different is fine. Cruel is cruel, no matter what language you say it in." By afternoon, more people arrived. Families from town, farmers from neighboring properties, workers from the spaceport. They came in trucks and on foot, carrying camping equipment and supplies. They set up tents in Margaret's fields, creating a small village around the farmhouse. Governor Bradford drove out personally to try to stop it. "This is madness," he told the growing crowd. "You're all putting yourselves in danger for no reason. The dragons will destroy this place. They will kill you. Then they'll have to kill us," said Betty Morrison, a schoolteacher who had 3 children of her own. "Because I won't live in a world where we sacrifice the helpless to save ourselves. I have a responsibility to protect this colony," Bradford insisted. "Then protect us by standing with us," Carl said. "Or get out of the way." The governor left, but he did not order anyone to disperse. Perhaps he knew it would not work. Or perhaps some part of him agreed with what they were doing. The story spread beyond Millbrook. News feeds across human space picked it up. An old woman and a rejected alien child, standing against an ancient empire. It should not have mattered to people on distant worlds, but somehow it did. Messages of support flooded in. Some sent money. Others sent supplies. A few even started making travel arrangements to join the protest in person, though they would not arrive in time. Dr. Helen Price set up a research station in Margaret's barn. She had been conducting more studies on Ruby, and the results fascinated her. The hatchling's brain was developing in ways normal dragons did not. She showed capacity for abstract thought, for art, for empathy. These were things dragon culture did not value, so they had never bothered to test for them. "Look at this." Helen showed Margaret scans of Ruby's neural patterns. "This region here controls emotional bonding. In normal dragons, it's minimal because they don't form attachments the way humans do. But in Ruby, it's highly developed. She's capable of love. Margaret. Real, deep, lasting emotional connection. I didn't need a brain scan to tell me that, Margaret said, watching Ruby play with some children who had come with their parents. The hatchling was gentle with them, careful not to scratch with her claws or knock them over with her wings. She had learned to be gentle, something most dragons never bothered with. But don't you see what this means? Helen was excited now, the way scientists get when they discover something new. Ruby isn't defective. She's evolved. She represents a different path dragons could take. Instead of just strength and fire, she has capabilities her species has suppressed for millennia. Will that matter to them? Helen's excitement faded. Probably not. They'll see it as proof she's worthless by their standards. On the second day, something unexpected happened. The Zentari ambassador to the Galactic Council made a public statement. The Zentari were an insectoid species that had been conquered by the dragons 3,000 years ago. They had won their freedom eventually, but they remembered what dragon philosophy meant for those deemed weak. We stand with the humans of Millbrook, the ambassador declared. For too long, the strong have decided the worth of the weak. For too long, might has been mistaken for right. Today, we see a different possibility. Other species began taking sides. Not all supported the humans. The Kravoks, who valued military strength above all else, sided with the dragons. So did the Theran hierarchy, who had their own policies about genetic purity. But others spoke up, for compassion, for second chances, for judging beings by more than their physical power. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. They debated late into the night about cultural relativism and universal rights. In the end, they issued a carefully worded statement that said nothing useful. They urged both sides to seek peaceful resolution while respecting cultural differences. It was the political equivalent of thoughts and prayers. On Margaret's farm, the crowd continued to grow. Someone set up a field kitchen. Parents organized activities for children. Veterans formed watch rotations. It was starting to look less like a protest and more like a community. Ruby thrived in the attention. She had spent her first weeks alive, knowing only rejection, then knowing only Margaret. Now she experienced acceptance from dozens of humans. Children wanted to pet her scales. Adults brought her treats and toys. She learned that the world could be kind. Governor Bradford returned on the evening of the second day. He looked tired, like he had not slept since the dragon ultimatum. He found Margaret sitting by a campfire, Ruby curled up beside her. I've been in contact with the galactic mediators, he said. They're willing to hear our case, but it will take weeks to arrange. The dragons won't wait that long. Then we stand tomorrow, Margaret said simply. Mrs. Cole, I've done the calculations. If the dragons attack, our defenses will last approximately 4 minutes. Then it's just fire and death. These people around you, they'll all burn. Their families will lose them. Children will lose parents. And for what? Margaret looked around at the faces illuminated by firelight. Young and old. Workers and professionals. People from every walk of life. They were laughing and talking, sharing food and stories. They knew the danger. They had chosen to be here anyway, for the principle that some things matter more than survival. Margaret said, My husband used to say that a life lived in fear of death isn't really lived at all. These people understand that. They're more alive right now, standing for something they believe in, than they would be hiding in their homes waiting to see if monsters come for them. The dragons aren't monsters. Then let them prove it. The third day dawned clear and bright. The dragon warships still hung in the sky, dark shapes against the blue. The crowd at Margaret's farm had grown to over 2,000 people. Not everyone in the colony, but enough. Enough to make a statement. Margaret dressed in her best clothes, the ones she wore to church on Sundays. She braided Ruby's mane, something the hatchling enjoyed. They had breakfast together. Simple food that tasted special because of what the day might bring. At noon, the dragons descended once more. But this time, as they approached the designated meeting field, they found not just Margaret and the governor, They found thousands of humans standing shoulder to shoulder, unarmed but unafraid. Drakthor landed and looked at the assembled crowd with something like confusion. In his experience, lesser beings submitted, or they died. This was something else. Something he had no context for. "What is this?" he demanded. "This is humanity," Carl Peterson said, stepping forward. "And we stand with Margaret Cole. You stand with weakness. You embrace failure. You will all burn for this foolishness." But as Drakthor spoke, Ruby did something none of them expected. She began to sing. The sound that came from the small dragon was nothing like a battle roar or a flame blast. It was a melody, pure and clear, rising into the air like a prayer. She had been practicing in secret, working out sounds in her throat that could not produce fire but could produce music. The song was wordless but full of meaning. It spoke of loneliness and belonging, of rejection and acceptance, of fear and love. It was everything Ruby had experienced in her short life, translated into sound. The effect on the dragons was immediate and profound. They froze, their aggressive postures forgotten. In all their long history, through all their evolution and culture, dragons had never created music. They had poetry about battle and glory, but never simple beauty for its own sake. Vermithrax took a step forward, then another. She approached her rejected offspring and, for the first time, really looked at what the small dragon had become. Not a warrior, not powerful, but something else entirely. "What is this sound?" Vermithrax asked quietly. "It's called singing, Doctor," Price said. "It's the expression of emotion through organized sound. Humans do it. Many species do it. But apparently, so can dragons when given the chance." Ruby continued her song, and it was being broadcast by news drones to the galaxy beyond. Billions of beings across hundreds of worlds heard a dragon hatchling sing a song of love. Among those billions were dragons. On Pyros Prime and 100 other worlds, dragons heard the strange sound coming from their defective offspring. Some dismissed it as further proof of weakness. But others, those who had never quite fit the warrior mold themselves, heard something that resonated in places they did not know they had. Drakthor lowered his head. When he spoke, his voice had lost some of its certainty. "This is not the dragon way." "Maybe the dragon way needs to change," Margaret said gently. "Maybe there's room in your culture for more than just strength. Maybe Ruby can show you that." For a long moment, no one moved. The thousands of humans waited. The dragons stood frozen, in confusion, and Ruby sang her simple song of love and belonging. Then Vermithrax did something unprecedented. She bent down and touched her snout to Ruby's head. A gesture of acknowledgement. Not love. Perhaps. Dragons might not be capable of that. But recognition. Acceptance that her offspring existed and had value, even if it was not the value she expected. "We cannot accept this," Drakthor said, but his words lacked the absolute conviction of before. "Then destroy us," Margaret said. "Burn us all. But know that the whole galaxy is watching. Know that history will judge what you do here. Know that killing us won't change what Ruby has become, or what she represents." The commander looked at the crowd, at Ruby, at his own warriors who seemed uncertain for the first time in their lives. He had come here to enforce tradition, to maintain the dragon way, but the dragon way had never accounted for this possibility. Ruby's song continued to spread across the galaxy. Within hours, it had been played on news channels from the core worlds to the frontier colonies. Reactions varied wildly depending on species and culture, but no one could ignore it. On Pyros Prime, the Dragon Council convened an emergency session. The elders watched the broadcast in silence, seeing their rejected hatchling standing before thousands of humans, singing a sound that should not exist. Young dragons throughout their empire heard the song and felt something stir. There had always been hatchlings who did not fit the mold perfectly. Not weak enough to abandon, but not strong enough to truly thrive. They had learned to suppress their differences, to force themselves into the warrior pattern. Now they heard proof that another way might exist. The Zentari played the song in their grand assembly hall. Many wept, Though insects did not cry the way mammals did, they remembered being judged as weak, being conquered because they did not value violence the way dragons did. This small dragon singing of love felt like vindication. Even species that sided with the dragons found themselves uncertain. The Kravoks war masters watched the broadcast and debated among themselves. Strength was everything in their culture too. But this display of defiance by unarmed humans made them reconsider what strength actually meant. Back at Millbrook, the standoff continued. Drakthor had not ordered the attack, but neither had he withdrawn. The dragon commander seemed caught between his orders and something he could not name. It was Vermithrax who finally broke the silence. She looked at Ruby, and then at Margaret. "Human, what have you done to this hatchling?" "I gave her food when she was hungry," Margaret said. "I cleaned her wounds when she was hurt. I kept her warm when she was cold. I taught her that she was valued and loved. That's all." "Love," Vermithrax repeated the word as if tasting something foreign. "This is a weakness among your kind." "No. It's our greatest strength. It's what makes us build instead of just destroy. It's what makes us protect instead of just conquer. It's what makes us keep trying even when we're scared." Vermithrax looked back at the warships hovering above. "If we take the hatchling by force, these humans will fight. They will die. But they will fight. All for a creature not of their blood. All for a child who needed us," Carl Peterson said. Dr. Price stepped forward with her tablet. "Commander Drakthor, Clan Mother Vermithrax, may I show you something?" She pulled up her research data, displaying it on a portable screen. "These are Ruby's neural scans compared to normal dragon hatchlings. Look at the development in these regions: empathy, abstract reasoning, artistic expression, emotional bonding. She's not defective, she's different. Evolution isn't just about getting stronger. Sometimes it's about getting smarter, or more adaptable, or more capable of cooperation." "Dragons do not need cooperation," Drakthor said. "We need only strength." "Then why do you live in clans?" Helen pressed. "Why do you have a council of elders? Why do you teach your young instead of just letting them figure everything out alone? You already cooperate. You just don't admit it." Another dragon in the delegation stepped forward. This was Kirithes, younger than the others and marked as a scholar rather than a warrior. He had been silent until now. "I have studied many species," Kirithes said carefully. "Humans are weak by our standards, yet they have spread across hundreds of worlds in barely a century. The Zentari were conquered by us, yet they eventually won their freedom. The Valorians have no weapons, yet they control the largest trading empire in the galaxy. Strength alone does not determine survival." "You speak dangerously," Drakthor warned. "I speak truthfully. Our empire is ancient and powerful. But when was the last time we truly grew? We conquer and we hold. But we do not change. We do not evolve. Perhaps this hatchling shows us a path we have been too proud to see." Vermithrax continued to stare at Ruby, who had finished her song and now stood quietly beside Margaret. The small dragon looked back at her birth mother without fear, but without recognition either. Margaret was her mother now in every way that mattered. "If we leave the hatchling here, what becomes of it?" Vermithrax asked. "She lives with me," Margaret said. "She learns and grows. She becomes whoever she's meant to be, not who someone else decides she should be. And if she wishes to return to her people one day," Margaret felt a pang at the thought but answered honestly, "then I would let her go." Love doesn't mean holding someone prisoner. It means wanting what's best for them, even if it hurts. This concept seemed to genuinely confuse Vermithrax. Dragons did not think this way. Possession was absolute. Letting go was not a choice, but a failure. Governor Bradford, sensing a possible opening for negotiation, spoke up. "Perhaps we could establish a formal arrangement. Ruby, I mean the hatchling, could remain here with Mrs. Cole but maintain connection to her birth clan. Regular reports on her development, visits if appropriate. A bridge between our cultures. Dragons do not compromise," Drakthor said. But the phrase was starting to sound hollow even to him. Maybe it's not compromise, Margaret said. Maybe it's an experiment. You wanted to know if Ruby could survive on her own. She did. More than survived. She thrived. That proves something, doesn't it? That your standards aren't the only measure of worth. Drakthor was silent for a long time. Around him, his warriors waited for orders. The humans waited for judgment. Ruby simply waited, not understanding the politics but trusting that Margaret would keep her safe. Finally, the great war commander spoke. We came here to reclaim our property and restore our honor. But I find I am uncertain what honor means in this situation. He looked at the thousands of humans standing peacefully in the field. You do not fight, yet you do not flee. You have no weapons, yet you show no fear. You defend a creature you found by accident, for no benefit to yourselves. This is not behavior I understand. That's because you measure everything in terms of power, Carl said. We measure some things in terms of right and wrong. Right and wrong are luxuries of the strong. The weak must simply survive. We're proving you can be both, Margaret said. Weak in your terms, but strong in ours, and still survive, still thrive, still protect what matters. Vermithrax made a sound that might have been a sigh. If we take the hatchling by force, we prove we are strong. But if we leave it here, we prove nothing, except that we chose not to fight. There is no honor in either path. Maybe there's a third path, Doctor, Price suggested. You could acknowledge that Ruby represents something new for your species. Not a failure, but a possibility. Let her grow here with the humans who saved her. Study what she becomes. If she's truly worthless, then you lose nothing. But if she develops abilities your species has suppressed, then you gain knowledge. Kyrithus nodded eagerly. This could be valuable research. We could learn about dragon potential we never explored, because it did not fit our cultural expectations. You speak as if the defective one is a science experiment, Vermithrax said. No, Margaret said firmly. She's a child with her own value and her own future. But she's also proof that your way isn't the only way. That should matter to beings as old and wise as you claim to be. The dragons conferred among themselves in their own language, a series of growls and hisses that no translation device could fully capture. The humans waited, knowing their fate hung in the balance. Ruby, tired from her song and confused by all the tension, did something simple. She walked over to Vermithrax and sat down in front of her birth mother. Then she began to make a soft humming sound. Not quite singing, but not quite silence either. Vermithrax looked down at the small dragon. For the first time, something like recognition passed between them. Not love. Dragons might never manage that. But acknowledgement of connection, of shared origin, of possibilities neither fully understood. Very well, Drakthor said finally. We will leave the defective one here. Not as abandonment, but as conditional custody. The human Margaret Cole will be recognized as guardian under galactic law. The hatchling will remain with her until such time as it chooses otherwise or proves itself worthy to return to dragon society. She's not an it, Margaret said automatically. As you wish. She will remain here. But be warned, human. If she comes to harm under your care, we will return. And next time, there will be no talking. It was not the warm reconciliation Margaret might have hoped for, but it was enough. Ruby would stay. That was all that mattered. The dragons prepared to depart. Vermithrax lingered for a moment, looking at Ruby one last time. Grow strong, small one, she said. It was the closest thing to a blessing a dragon could offer. Ruby chirped in response, a sound that might have meant anything or nothing. Then she scurried back to Margaret's side, her place of safety. The dragons launched themselves skyward, their wings creating wind that flattened the grass. Within minutes, the warships had left orbit, heading back to dragon space. The crowd erupted in cheers. People hugged each other, crying with relief and joy. They had stood against an empire and survived. More than survived. They had won. Governor Bradford approached Margaret, looking relieved and exhausted. You did it. I can't believe you actually did it. We did it, Margaret corrected. All of us together. Over the following weeks, life slowly returned to normal at Millbrook. The protesters went home to their families. The news drones moved on to other stories. The galaxy's attention shifted to new controversies, but things had changed in small ways. More species began questioning traditions about genetic purity and survival of the strongest. The Zentari Assembly passed new laws protecting the rights of those deemed weak. Even some young dragons began speaking publicly about alternative paths for their kind. Ruby continued to grow under Margaret's care. She would never be large or powerful by dragon standards. Her fire breathing remained weak, producing only small flames suitable for lighting candles or starting campfires. But she could sing, and think, and feel, and love. She could paint pictures with her claws, and solve puzzles with her mind. She could make friends, and show compassion. She became exactly what she was meant to be, not what others expected. Dr. Price published her research on Ruby's development. It became required reading in xenobiology courses across the galaxy. Other species who practiced selection or abandonment of their young began reconsidering their policies. Margaret Cole became something of a celebrity, though she hated the attention. She gave a few interviews, always emphasizing that she had not done anything special. She had simply done what any decent person would do when they found someone in need. On quiet evenings, she would sit on her porch with Ruby curled up beside her chair. The dragon was getting too big for lap-sitting now. But she still tried sometimes, making Margaret laugh. They would watch the sunset together, comfortable in their silence. "You know," Margaret said one evening, "when I found you in that field, I thought I was just helping an injured animal. I had no idea you would change everything." Ruby made a questioning sound. "You showed people that different doesn't mean wrong. That weakness in one area can mean strength in another. That love and compassion aren't just nice ideas, but real forces that can stand against empires." Ruby snuggled closer, her version of a hug. Margaret stroked the dragon's scales gently. "Your birth mother thought she was throwing away something broken. Instead, she gave the galaxy a gift. She just didn't know it yet." In the distance, a ship entered orbit and descended toward the spaceport. More visitors coming to see the famous dragon and her human grandmother. Margaret sighed but smiled. She supposed she could tolerate a few more interviews if it meant spreading the message. Some things were worth fighting for. Some beings were worth saving. And sometimes, the weakest member of a powerful race could teach the entire galaxy lessons about what real strength meant. Ruby had been mocked as a weak newborn. Now she was proof that weakness and worth were not the same thing. And Margaret, an elderly human woman with no special powers or abilities, had become the shield that protected that proof long enough for others to see its value. Together, they had changed the galaxy, one small act of kindness at a time.